We know this is an absolutely authentic letter that President Kennedy wrote because 1, it's on White House stationery. 2, we've authenticated his handwriting. And 3, it comes right from his personal secretary who retained it after the assassination.
John F. Kennedy is remembered for many things: his charisma, his speeches, his youth, and his vision of a better America. But few realize that behind the polished image of a beloved president was a man who left behind a carefully crafted personal fortune, one that held more than money. It carried meaning. It carried intention. At the time of his assassination in 1963, JFK was already a symbol of modern American leadership, a beacon of hope for a nation still finding its post-war footing. Yet while the world mourned a fallen hero, his family discovered something else: quietly prepared gifts, personal letters, and a network of financial and emotional support designed to endure long after his death. Unlike today's billionaires who flaunt their wealth, JFK's money came from strategic planning and a family legacy rooted in silence, not spectacle. His fortune wasn't meant for headlines, it was meant for impact. And when his family gathered after his passing to read what he had left behind, they weren't overwhelmed by numbers in a bank account. They were overwhelmed by the depth of thought he had put into it all. But to truly understand the wealth and the tears, we need to go back to the man who built it all: Joseph Kennedy Sr. Joseph Kennedy Sr., the mastermind of the Kennedy Empire. Before JFK could ever walk into the White House, there was Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., a man whose name built the foundation of everything the family would become. Born in 1888 in Boston to Irish Catholic parents, Joseph faced discrimination early on. But rather than being defeated by it, he used it as fuel. He graduated from Harvard and quickly made a name for himself in banking, investing, and business. His mind was sharp, his ambition endless, and his methods, though controversial, were ruthlessly effective. He didn't just make money, he made it multiply. From smart stock market plays in the 1920s to massive real estate investments and even early Hollywood studio acquisitions, Joseph was decades ahead of his time. He bought low, sold high, and never apologized for how he played the game. By the time his son Jack was preparing for political life, Joseph had already amassed enough wealth to make that journey possible. But for Joseph, riches weren't the goal. Influence was. A seat at the table, a family legacy of power, purpose, and permanence. And as we'll see next, he was willing to use every tool, legal or otherwise, to build an empire designed to last for generations. Bootlegging rumors and Wall Street. Genius. After JFK's assassination, whispers about the Kennedy family's fortune grew louder. One persistent rumor: that Joseph Kennedy made his fortune as a bootlegger during Prohibition. While there's no confirmed evidence of that, one thing is certain: he wasn't shy about pushing the boundaries of legal business. Long before insider trading became illegal, Joseph mastered it. He knew how to read the market, and more importantly, how to beat it. In 1929, just before the Great Crash, he sold off overvalued stocks and shorted others, earning millions as other investors lost everything. Ironically, Franklin D. Roosevelt later appointed Joseph to head the newly formed Securities and Exchange Commission, the same system he had once exploited. But instead of behaving like a crook in a suit, Joseph played by the rules and enforced them too. It was a stunning twist: the fox guarding the henhouse, now setting the rules for Wall Street. Joseph's skill wasn't in one industry. It was in identifying patterns, understanding timing, and knowing exactly when to step in and when to disappear. That precision made him rich, but his vision extended far beyond money. It extended into matchmaking, family strategy, and building alliances that would serve the Kennedys for decades to come. Strategic marriages and old money connections. Joseph Kennedy didn't just build wealth, he knew how to merge it. His marriage to Rose Fitzgerald, daughter of the powerful Boston mayor, wasn't just about love. It was a move that merged ambition with political heritage, creating a foundation for something much bigger: the Kennedy dynasty. That mindset carried into the next generation. When John F. Kennedy married Jacqueline Bouvier in 1953, it was more than a romantic union. Jackie came from a respected old money family, and her cultural sophistication and elegance brought something the Kennedys didn't yet have: social clout on the global stage. Together, JFK and Jackie formed a power couple that could charm both diplomats and the American public. Their marriage connected the Kennedys with circles of high society, reinforcing their image not just as politicians, but as American royalty. It was networking at the highest level: political, social, and financial. And the more connections they formed, the more influence they wielded. These relationships weren't always visible, but behind every handshake and gala event, the Kennedy fortune grew stronger, reinforced by old money alliances and forward-thinking marriages. And while Joseph was forging these relationships, he was also investing heavily into the one thing that never loses value: land. The silent engine of the Kennedy fortune in real estate became one of Joseph Kennedy's most strategic and enduring investments. From brownstones in Boston to sprawling compounds in Palm Beach and Cape Cod, Joseph quietly built a portfolio of properties that would define the family's lifestyle for generations. The Kennedy compound in Hyannisport is more than a vacation home. It's a symbol of power, privacy, and permanence. It's where policies were debated, legacies were built, and family history was made. It served as a campaign headquarters, a family refuge, and even a presidential retreat. But the Kennedy land holdings weren't just sentimental. They were commercial, too. Joseph invested in large-scale properties like Miami's Hialeah racetrack, and later secured stakes in major real estate firms like Vornado Realty. These commercial ventures continue to bring in millions in passive income. Even today, the Kennedy family name is tied to some of the most durable and lucrative real estate in the country. These holdings aren't just about wealth, they're about power through ownership. And they laid the foundation for a new kind of legacy, one protected by structure, foresight, and trust. Which brings us to the real secret behind why this fortune has endured. Trust funds that built a dynasty. When Joseph Kennedy created the structure of the family's financial empire, he wasn't just thinking about his children. He was thinking about their children and the generations after that. The Kennedy fortune isn't floating freely in bank accounts. It's protected, preserved, and guarded through an intricate network of trusts. These trusts are professionally managed, meaning family members don't directly control the investments. That design limits reckless spending while ensuring the money continues to grow. Distributions are scheduled, conditional, and tied to long-term plans, not whims or politics. It's this structure that allowed the Kennedy family to survive scandals, losses, and even tragedy, without the financial ruin that has haunted other powerful American dynasties. Today, dozens of Kennedy descendants benefit from these trusts, and while they may not all live in mansions or hold office, the quiet income from those accounts supports education, advocacy, and careers of public service. This financial stability helped pave the way for JFK to pursue politics full-time, and it also allowed him to make one extraordinary gesture as president, one that said more about his values than his wallet. A salary JFK never touched. When John F. Kennedy entered the White House in 1961, he was already a wealthy man, not from shady deals or Hollywood endorsements, but from a life shaped by trust funds, family planning, and generational wealth. That's why, when he became president, he made a bold and admirable decision to donate his entire presidential salary, every penny, to charity. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a reflection of who he was and what his family had given him. That donation became a symbolic cornerstone of the Kennedy legacy. It showed the American people that JFK wasn't in it for the money. He didn't need to be. His finances were already secure, thanks to decades of planning, investment, and family strategy. And in doing so, he strengthened the image of Camelot, a golden era of service over self, of dignity over greed. His salary may have been forfeited, but his legacy was enriched. And as we'll soon see, the fortune he quietly built, not just for the country, but for his family, left behind more than dollars. It left behind memories, messages, and personal touches that would break their hearts and hold them together. JFK's personal estate and secret gifts. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, the world grieved the loss of a president. But inside the Kennedy family home, the mourning was layered with another kind of shock, one that came not from sorrow, but from discovery. For all the power and influence he wielded publicly, JFK had also been preparing quietly. His personal estate wasn't enormous in comparison to his father's fortune, but what he left behind was far more intentional than anyone expected. Tucked within his private holdings were gifts, some material, some deeply emotional, that would leave his family stunned. There were stocks and accounts placed in trusts for Jackie, Caroline, and John Jr., but what moved them most were the personal touches. Unpublished letters, handwritten notes, rare books, keepsakes tied to family milestones. Some were stored in leather-bound boxes, others carefully placed in locked drawers, discovered only months after his death. Caroline, barely a child at the time, would only learn the full extent of these treasures years later. And when she did, it brought her to tears. Not because of the value, but because of the care. It was the proof that JFK had been thinking about them all along, even in the middle of governing a nation. What his family found wasn't just wealth, it was legacy made personal. And in Jackie Kennedy's hands, it became something even greater. Jackie Kennedy, the keeper of legacy and fortune. If JFK built the foundation of the Kennedy legacy, Jackie became its guardian. In the wake of her husband's assassination, she didn't simply mourn, she managed. She protected their children from the glare of public scrutiny, kept the family estate intact, and began crafting the narrative that would later define an entire presidency. Jackie's second marriage to Aristotle Onassis in 1968 drew controversy, but few understood the strategy behind it. Onassis brought with him immense resources, global influence, and above all, protection. For Jackie, marrying one of the world's wealthiest men wasn't about status. It was about insulating her children from the chaos that came with the Kennedy name. Behind her composed exterior was a woman moving with absolute clarity. She worked quietly, securing legal control over JFK's unpublished writings, his image rights, and the properties he left behind. She made sure every memory was preserved, every asset protected. She turned grief into strength, all while keeping her children's lives as normal as possible. Jackie didn't just uphold the Kennedy fortune, she elevated it. She added elegance, poise, and a sense of invincibility to a family already drenched in history. And among all her careful curations, one secret discovery would bring her to her knees. The secret that made Jackie weep. Somewhere in the archives of JFK's personal study, Jackie found a letter. It had been written just weeks before his death, during one of his late-night sessions alone in the White House. It wasn't policy-related. It wasn't a draft of a speech. It was a note meant only for her. In it, he spoke not as president, but as a husband and father. He wrote about the future, about fears he couldn't name publicly, about the possibility of not being there to watch their children grow up. The letter ended with a single heartbreaking line. "If anything happens to me, let them know how much I loved them. Every day, in every way." Jackie read it in silence. Then she folded it neatly, pressed it to her chest, and wept. It wasn't gold or real estate or trust funds that moved her. It was that message. A man who had everything, who faced the pressures of leading the free world, still found time to leave behind something that mattered far more than money. The letter remains sealed in the Kennedy archives, locked away from public eyes. But those who've seen it say it's the most powerful thing JFK ever wrote. And it would become the emotional anchor for a narrative Jackie was about to create, one that would forever define her husband's place in history. The myth that shaped a fortune. Just days after the assassination, Jackie granted a rare interview to Life magazine. She spoke with journalist Theodore H. White, and what she said would reshape how the world remembered her husband. She spoke of JFK's love for the Broadway musical Camelot, particularly one line, "Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot." In that moment, she framed his presidency not just as a term in office, but as a mythical, noble chapter in American history. One filled with youth, beauty, hope, and idealism. That idea caught fire in the public imagination, transforming JFK from a fallen leader into a timeless icon. But Camelot wasn't just poetry, it was strategy. It turned the Kennedy brand into a living legend. It fueled books, museums, foundations, and decades of admiration. It solidified the family name not just in political circles, but in the soul of a grieving nation. Jackie's framing gave the Kennedy fortune something money couldn't buy: immortality. And the myth of Camelot would continue to pay emotional and financial dividends, as JFK's writings and voice lived on long after his passing. One of those lasting echoes came from his own pen, well before politics even called his name. JFK's literary impact and book royalties. Before he was president, John F. Kennedy was a writer. In 1957, he won a Pulitzer Prize for Profiles in Courage, a book that highlighted moments of political bravery in American history. It became a bestseller, catapulting him into national awareness, and even more, providing a steady stream of royalty income. But Profiles in Courage was more than a political tool. It revealed the values that guided JFK long before the White House: integrity, sacrifice, service. Those themes would later shape his policies, his public persona, and ultimately, his presidency. The royalties from his books didn't stop when he died. They continued, quietly, adding to the family's estate, managed through trusts and literary rights held by Jackie, and passed to their children. Even today, his works are studied, reprinted, and sold worldwide. The Kennedy fortune was never just financial, it was intellectual. JFK left behind not just money, but meaning. His words became part of America's vocabulary. His ideas helped pay for Caroline and John Jr.'s futures. And in libraries and classrooms across the country, he remains present. Not through campaign speeches, but through pages still being read. But while his words lived on, so did the family's ability to grow what he left behind, far beyond what he ever imagined. Modern investments, how the money still grows. The Kennedy family didn't stop with what Joseph and John built. They evolved. They understood that legacy isn't preserved by nostalgia alone, but by adapting to the future. Today, the Kennedy fortune isn't just sitting idle in old bank accounts or dusty trust funds. It's working, growing, and quietly shaping the present through modern investments that reflect changing times and forward-thinking values. Over the years, the family has smartly diversified their holdings across sectors that define the 21st century. Private equity, emerging tech startups, renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and commercial real estate now form the backbone of a portfolio as complex as it is strategic. Their involvement isn't always public, but it's precise, calculated, intentional. Much of this is managed through Joseph P. Kennedy Enterprises, a private financial entity that connects decades of family planning with today's evolving economy. It doesn't simply handle wealth, it preserves vision. It ensures that the Kennedy name doesn't just remain historical, it stays influential. The family has long believed that fortune should be fluid, not frozen, and that belief continues to guide their financial moves. One standout example is their partnership with Vornado Realty Trust, a major player in American commercial real estate. Through it, the Kennedy family has reportedly earned more than $170 million since the late 1990s, passive income that supports not just their lifestyle, but their philanthropic foundations and political interests. And that's just a piece of the overall portfolio, much of which remains private by design. While some Kennedy heirs take on public roles, running for office, serving as diplomats, or advancing public policy, others operate behind the scenes. They serve on nonprofit boards, oversee family initiatives, or manage the very investments that keep the Kennedy name financially powerful. There is no single path for them, but a shared understanding that the fortune they inherited must continue to evolve with the world around it. This quiet financial stewardship is part of what has kept the Kennedy brand alive. It's not flashy, and it rarely makes headlines, but it's smart, resilient, long-term. And it's exactly the kind of approach JFK might have admired: intelligent, visionary, and deeply purposeful. Because for the Kennedys, money has never been the goal. It's always been the means, a platform for public good, a tool for lasting change, and a foundation for something far greater than wealth alone. And as we'll see next, many Kennedys have used that platform not just to prosper, but to serve. Private wealth, public service. What separates the Kennedy story from many other wealthy American families is this: their fortune didn't shield them from the world, it empowered them to serve it. Their wealth wasn't an escape from responsibility, it was the foundation from which they could act on it. For the Kennedys, privilege came with a purpose, and for generations, they chose public service over private indulgence. John F. Kennedy set the tone early. Though he had the resources to live a life of luxury, he stepped into politics with full awareness of the sacrifices ahead. He didn't need the salary. He didn't crave the spotlight. What he wanted was to make a difference. And in doing so, he laid down the blueprint for what it meant to be a Kennedy in public life. His younger brother, Ted Kennedy, followed that path with extraordinary commitment, serving in the U.S. Senate for nearly 47 years. He became one of the most influential lawmakers of the 20th century, championing civil rights, healthcare, and education, all while drawing from the same financial security that allowed him to focus on long-term vision rather than short-term gain. Caroline Kennedy, JFK's daughter, later became the U.S. ambassador to Japan, earning respect not just for her name, but for her quiet diplomacy, intelligence, and grace. Joe Kennedy III stepped into Congress, continuing the family tradition with humility and conviction. And beyond the big names, countless other Kennedy descendants have taken up roles in advocacy, law, education, and humanitarian work. They could have chosen the easy path, comfortable, quiet, and far from the public eye. But most didn't. And that's what sets this family apart. Behind each Kennedy in public service is a powerful, quiet infrastructure, a system of trust funds, legal advisors, family foundations, and long-term investments that support them emotionally and financially. That system didn't breed entitlement. It allowed them to take risks, to speak up, and to carry on their legacy without fear of financial fallout. John F. Kennedy didn't just model this balance, he defined it. He used his wealth not as a wall, but as a bridge. And when he died, the void left behind wasn't just about losing a leader. It was about losing the man who showed the world how to turn power into purpose. That's why, in the most intimate moments after his passing, it wasn't the size of his estate that moved his family to tears. It was how he left it, with heart, with meaning, and with love. And that leads us to the final chapter, the part of JFK's legacy that made his family cry. The fortune that made his family cry. In the end, it wasn't the wealth that brought the tears. It wasn't the millions tucked into trusts or the value of the estate that shook the Kennedy family to their core. It was the way it was left, the thoughtfulness behind every detail, the love woven into each envelope, each gesture, each sealed box of memories. When John F. Kennedy died, he didn't leave behind thrones or empires. He left behind traces of himself. Quiet, intentional pieces of a man who knew the future might come without him. There were notes scribbled in the margins of his books, underlined passages in poetry collections he hoped his children would one day read. There were letters carefully tucked away in drawers, some addressed, some simply signed, "Love, Daddy." There were gifts wrapped with care. Birthday cards for Caroline he'd written months in advance, a silver pen for John Jr.'s high school graduation, and a worn photo of the family from Hyannisport folded and placed inside a favorite leather wallet. These were not the treasures of a politician. They were the keepsakes of a father. The trust funds were generous, of course, strategically set up to ensure his children would never struggle, that Jackie would never be without support, and that his family's future would remain protected. But that wasn't what made them cry. What moved them to tears were the words, the foresight, the quiet, enduring presence in things he'd left behind. Because in every decision, in every sealed document, In every handwritten letter and final signature, JFK wasn't planning for power. He was planning for permanence. And so, when Caroline opened a velvet box decades later and found a hand-penned note from her father meant for her sweet 16, a birthday he never saw, she broke down. When Jackie found the letter hidden beneath a brass paperweight in which JFK wrote of his hopes for the world his children would inherit, she wept not for what she had lost, but for what he had given. His fortune was not just one of wealth, but of intention. A legacy shaped not by headlines, but by heart. It was a final promise, silently delivered through time, that no matter what came next, he would always be there, in thought, in memory, in love. Forever a father, forever present.